The knife slid cleanly through the steak, and Thomas chewed slowly, mechanically, while laughter pinged off the chandelier like a swarm of mockingbirds let loose in his own house. His wife's laugh was the loudest, that high, social gathering kind of laugh. The one she used when she wanted people to know she'd won something. The boy, because Thomas refused to call a 17-year-old with a mouth like that a man, leaned back in his chair, proud, still holding the glass, still waiting for a reaction that never came. Just another smirk passed between him and Helena, like they'd shared a private joke for months, and tonight was the big punchline. The guest of honor, her boss, tried to smile, awkwardly, but Thomas caught the shift, the hesitation in his fork, the way he blinked once too slowly when the words landed. Just a joke, the boss chuckled barely. Kids these days. Thomas wiped the corner of his mouth with his napkin and looked out the window as a car passed by. His own reflection in the glass seemed faded, like he wasn't quite there. That's how they wanted him. Background. Furniture. The man who funded the candles and poured the wine and sat politely while his son turned him into a punchline. Honestly, Dad, the boy continued, pushing his luck. Maybe next time, just wire transfer the gift. Then you won't have to come. Helena snapped her fingers and laughed like it was all harmless. Be nice, honey. Your dad's had a long week. And right there, right then, something in Thomas's spine clicked. Not snapped, just clicked into place. Like a gear-long rusted finally remembered what it was for. And beneath the calm surface, a current began pulling him somewhere colder. Sharper. He set down his knife and excused himself from the table. No drama. No stomp. Just a calm walk down the hall toward his office. That's the part none of them noticed. Because Thomas had been invisible so long, they never even turned their heads. If you're still here reading, do me a favor. Hit subscribe. More than 90% of listeners never do, and honestly, it's what keeps stories like this coming. It helps the team keep building, even when the world tries to erase the people who do the real work. Back in the hallway, Thomas passed the photo wall. It used to be covered in vacations, beach trips, ski lodges. Lately, more and more of the frames had empty spots, photos removed after arguments or replaced with Helena's corporate shots. The last one left of just him and his son was tucked in a corner, half covered by a framed plaque from her firm. He reached into the drawer of his office desk, opened a folder labeled Hold. Inside were documents, dry, forgotten things, transfer agreements, compliance memos, a signed NDA he doubted Helena even remembered. He tapped the folder once, then glanced at a smaller envelope beneath it. Cream-colored, sealed, stamped in wax. It had sat there untouched for 6 months. He picked it up, held it to the light, then slid it into his coat pocket. When he came back to the dining room, the laughter had moved on. Helena was telling a story about her last client meeting, something about quarterly numbers and a difficult VP. Her boss, Daniel, looked at her, but kept darting glances back at Thomas. Thomas poured himself another glass of wine. Saturday. Smiled once at the guest. Enjoying the evening? He asked, calm as lake water in winter. Daniel blinked. Yes, of course. Thank you. Wonderful home. Glad to hear it. Thomas swirled the wine in his glass. It's always good to get a sense of who's benefiting from the structures we build, don't you think? The room went quiet for half a second. Then Helena's phone buzzed. She checked it, eyes narrowing slightly. Oh, it's from HR. Probably about the retreat schedule. She laughed. They always wait until Friday nights, don't they? Thomas stood. I've got an early flight, he said. Don't wait up. Work again. Helena mocked. The great invisible man heads back into the system. But this time, her boss didn't laugh. His fork hovered midair, a bead of sauce trembling on the edge. And that's when Helena noticed him looking, not at her, but at Thomas, as if seeing something he hadn't before, something buried under the surface, and starting to rise. Helena didn't even ask what the project was. She was too busy celebrating her new strategic advisor title and pushing her social media rebrand, some nonsense about authentic leadership and bold transitions. A week earlier, she was emailing Thomas screen caps of Canva templates for her newsletter banner. Now, she barely glanced up from her phone. She assumed, as always, that he was off doing back-end things, coding, configuring, cleaning up messes she didn't understand and never wanted to. Thomas packed light. A single leather bag, his older laptop, the one she once mocked as prehistoric, and a folder of documents that hadn't seen daylight in 5 years. He drove 3 hours south, not to the data center she assumed, but to a steel gray building tucked between a bank and a private equity firm. No signage. Just an elevator that required a key card and a receptionist who didn't look up when he walked in. Elaine Monroe stood waiting. 50-something, sharp suit, sharper eyes. She didn't do pleasantries. Just handed him a coffee and motioned to a private conference room. Glass walls, but soundproofed. In her world, silence was a currency. Thomas laid out the documents like a man setting a chessboard. First, the acquisition memorandum from 2019, when her boutique firm was quietly rolled into a larger conglomerate. Then the performance review audits. Then the 2 NDAs signed by Daniel, her boss, both tied to a compliance retainer Thomas had funded through an anonymous holding group. Lastly, a sheet that looked almost laughably simple. Amendment to Stakeholder Oversight, Q3. Elaine scanned it all in silence. Then she sat back. "You want to reactivate?" she asked. "I want it formalized. A direct link between my oversight position and Daniel's HR authority. Retroactive, but dated precisely to the merger date. Quiet, of course. And the audit trail." Thomas reached into his bag and handed her a flash drive. Backed up in 3 places. One in Zurich, one in Nashville, one in a drawer Helena thinks is full of expired coupons. Elaine smirked. Still charming as ever. He didn't smile back. Just tapped the folder. "By Friday." She raised an eyebrow. "You planning something theatrical?" "I'm planning something accurate." Elaine nodded. "Then I'll make it elegant." By the time Thomas checked into his hotel that evening, Helena had texted twice. Once to ask if he'd seen the article her boss posted about her promotion, and once to ask where he left the wine opener. Neither got a reply. He spent the evening reading. Not books. Logs. Email threads. Change logs from a Slack workspace he technically wasn't supposed to have access to anymore. He traced comments Helena made months ago about cleaning house in their marriage. Comments that now felt less metaphorical. One line stuck with him. "He's the kind of man who builds the box, then forgets to climb out of it." The funny thing was, she wasn't wrong. He had built the box. The legal structure, the tax shields, the HR onboarding protocols. Every policy in her firm that got her praised for streamlining was actually his. But what she missed, what they all missed, was that the builder never forgets. He just waits. Thursday morning, Thomas got a ping from Elaine. The documents were ready. Notarized. Backdated legally. All clean. "And Daniel?" he asked over the phone. Elaine's voice was calm. "He's a little nervous. But I told him the truth. You're not the kind of man who demands loyalty." Thomas paused. "No. You just write the contracts that make disloyalty expensive." That night, back at home, Helena greeted him at the door with a glass of wine and a playful, "Did you miss me?" Thomas kissed her on the cheek, said, "Always," and walked past. She didn't notice he didn't unpack, or that the old laptop never left the bag, or that, while she scrolled through congratulatory comments from coworkers calling her a visionary, her husband stood in the garage staring at the single sealed envelope on the workbench. The same one he'd carried down 3 flights of stairs in a building with no name. This time he picked it up and wrote a name on the front. Just one. Daniel. She had stood in the kitchen in tears, backlit by the dim morning light, holding a rejection letter from yet another mid-level job she claimed was beneath her. Helena, ever the actress when she wanted to be, dropped the envelope on the counter and said it like a confession. "I don't want to just work anymore. I want to matter. Can you understand that?" Thomas remembered the moment precisely, not just because it was the first time she ever said please in 6 months, but because she followed it with the phrase that twisted like a knife. "You've always had your systems. I need something that's mine." So he said yes. He wrote the tuition check for the 2-year executive business program. Quietly, without conditions. When the financial aid officer raised an eyebrow about his age on the backer form, he said, "She's the brand. I'm the back end." She framed her diploma in gold and hung it in their hallway, right above a portrait of the 2 of them from their 10th anniversary. Thomas noticed one day the portrait had moved, replaced by an abstract print of something meaningless, but trendy. He didn't comment. Next came the lease. A polished space in a heritage building downtown. The kind of place with exposed brick and Edison bulbs, where no one actually consulted anything except their own reflection. She needed a guarantor. Thomas signed the papers while she scrolled Pinterest boards about minimalist empowerment vibes. He hooked up her first server himself, wired it in on a Sunday, running cables through a vent shaft because the contractor was late, set up her domain name, built her email funnel, introduced her to a former client of his who needed branding help. That account paid her rent for 6 months. She called it fate. He called it Thursday. But the real turning point came after a quiet lunch with one of Thomas's old colleagues. DeMarco, a venture analyst from the private group Thomas used to work with before they modernized. They were scouting acquisitions, boutique consultancies with a specialty in mid-sized firm reinvention. Helena's fledgling company fit the mold perfectly. Thomas didn't pitch her, not directly. He just left a brochure in DeMarco's hand, one Helena had designed. 2 weeks later, she got a call from someone random, asking if she was open to talks. She ran into the bedroom squealing like a teenager. "They found me. Can you believe it?" He smiled. Incredible. The buyout wasn't huge, but the absorption guaranteed her a position, a title, and the illusion of independence wrapped in a corporate bow. Helena never asked where the seed capital for the merger audit came from. She was too busy giving interviews about navigating pivots and owning your evolution. Thomas had submitted the merger paperwork himself as an advisory witness, through a shell entity. Not illegal, just careful. After the merger, she was named Brand Strategy Consultant, Tier 2. Not glamorous, but solid. She acted like she'd been chosen, like the universe finally recognized her. The company even gave her a new boss. Younger, taller, better at bluffing with buzzwords. Daniel. Thomas met him once in passing. At the holiday gala, Helena begged him not to attend because it was really just for internal folks. He showed up anyway, stood at the back, watched Daniel introduce Helena as a rising star. She beamed. What she didn't see was the brief look Daniel gave him across the room, like a man who suddenly realized the janitor might own the building. Because Daniel knew, the merger paperwork had gone through legal, and one of the names on the board approval chain was T. Whitmore. Thomas Whitmore. Silent stakeholder. Advisory capacity. Discretion required. Daniel didn't mention it, of course. He had too much to gain from playing along. Helena had charm, presentation, and she never once asked where the scaffolding came from. She thought she'd climbed a ladder made of ambition. It was actually built of debt, legality, and quiet engineering. Every rung installed by the same man she now treated like a placeholder. Over time, she stopped thanking him, stopped including him in updates. Her world became branded photos, curated posts, and increasingly late nights at team dinners. Thomas didn't question it. He just kept the server running, kept the logs saved, kept the paperwork tucked in the filing cabinet under the old Christmas decorations. Because he knew, every empire that forgets its architect eventually meets the blueprint again, usually in court. It happened late one night in their living room. The soft hum of the dishwasher, her laptop glowing on the couch, Helena in glasses and sweatpants pretending she was buried in admin stuff. She waved a few documents at him, breezily. "Just need your eyes on this, Han. You're good with this boring language." The irony didn't miss him. The man who built structures for a living was being asked to check grammar in her HR packet. He took the papers without a word. She went back to her phone while he read. Page after page of bland text, employment clauses, equity vesting, non-disclosure reiterations. Then came page 17. A small paragraph in 9-point font. Operational oversight may, at the discretion of the board, be subject to third-party compliance verification. Thomas circled the phrase in pencil just once. She didn't notice. He rewrote the line that followed, added 12 words, invisible to the untrained eye. Such verifications shall require sign-off by a designated stakeholder under confidentiality terms, per board approval. In plain English, someone she didn't know, would have the legal right to audit her boss's authority, to approve, deny, or freeze activity tied to HR. To her, she signed everything the next morning over coffee, scrolling through emails while he printed the final pages. "You're such a lifesaver," she said, sipping her oat milk latte. "I swear, I'd be lost without you when it comes to these forms." He smiled and handed her a pen. "That's why I exist, right?" She laughed, signed, and didn't even look at the line beside her name where his small initials, TW, sat in the reviewed by field. 3 months later, the clause went into effect. Helena's boss, Daniel, received an automated message from the compliance department requesting acknowledgement of periodic audits for all subordinate managers. He scanned the email, cursed, and clicked "I acknowledge." The audit signature appeared automatically at the bottom. T. Whitmore, Advisory Board. At first, Daniel thought it was a software glitch. He even asked IT who Whitmore was. They told him it was an external compliance reviewer, old contract, predating the merger. He left it alone. That's the kind of man Daniel was. Cocky until someone mentioned audits. Then suddenly humble. Meanwhile, Helena bragged at dinner parties that her new department was so streamlined. She had no idea that her so-called streamlined reports were being quietly routed through a system Thomas helped design years ago, a system that flagged discrepancies, hours logged off-site, and HR-approved travel expenses. One flag caught his attention: 2 off-site client meetings logged under her name. Same location, same time, same invoice ID as her boss's. He didn't mention it. Didn't need to. The log spoke louder than suspicion ever could. At the next compliance cycle, Daniel received an automatic reminder. Please confirm accuracy of reported off-site client sessions, Q1. The confirmation had to be signed manually this time. No automated acknowledgement. Daniel hesitated, aware that whoever signed off on it was watching. Then, reluctantly, he signed. Within seconds, a digital record of his approval and the session details was saved to a secure audit folder. Under Authorized Reviewer, T. Whitmore. The company's new HR director eventually asked in a quarterly meeting, "Does anyone even know who this guy is?" Daniel had cleared his throat and said, "He's old board legacy. Don't mess with it. Legal likes him where he is." That was the safest answer possible. Helena never heard a word of it. She just bragged that her boss trusted her implicitly, that she had real influence now, all while the invisible ink of her husband's careful edits tied every move she made to a silent overseer. The irony was delicious. Every expense, every approval, every client dinner had a hidden witness, one she had personally authorized with her own signature, one she'd invited into her corporate bloodstream without a clue. And by the time she toasted her boss at that humiliating dinner, Thomas already knew she was sitting on a trap she had built herself. All it would take to spring it was a single, quiet call from him to compliance. The company might forget who signed the papers, but the system never did, and neither did the man who wrote it. The conference room was deliberately chosen, not at the office, not at the firm. Neutral territory, a glass-walled rental suite on the 12th floor of a building Daniel likely passed 100 times without noticing. There were no corporate logos, no reception desk, just a digital keypad to enter and silence inside. Thomas sat at the head of the glass table already when Daniel walked in. No handshake, no small talk, just that twitchy look in the eyes of a man who thinks he's about to be sued, fired, or both. Daniel set his phone face down, as if it mattered. I didn't know who she was to you. Not until that dinner. Not until he said that. Thomas didn't blink. You mean when my son made the toast? Daniel nodded, sheepish. I thought it was just a joke. I didn't realize. You thought I was the one apologizing. Daniel looked at the 2 manila folders already waiting for him. His name typed cleanly on the front. Thomas didn't push them toward him. Just let them sit like a loaded weapon between them. I've asked the mediator to allow a witness, Thomas said. You'll be there. You'll confirm what you've known since the merger. Who sat on the advisory board? Who has legal authority to audit your department? And who, he tapped the folder, authorized the last round of expense approvals tied to Helena's role. Daniel tried to gather himself. He reached forward and opened the top folder. His eyes scanned a few lines. Recognition hit like acid reflux. You kept this? He asked, voice thin. This was years ago. Thomas didn't answer, just laid a second document beside it. The May 2022 audit, labeled clearly at the top. Missing disclosures, pending board review. The paper was stamped, initialed, and signed. Thomas's name, clear as day. Daniel flipped through quickly, hoping Thomas could see it in his hands, hoping it wasn't what he feared. But it was. Line items for client meetings, travel authorizations, bonus approvals. All passed through Helena's name. All rubber-stamped by Daniel. All without adequate review. The system hadn't flagged them, because Thomas hadn't let it. Not yet. Daniel swallowed hard. This could sink her. Thomas raised an eyebrow. I'm not interested in sinking anyone. I'm interested in truth. You'll show up. You'll verify what's written here. You'll answer questions from the mediator. Daniel leaned back, nervous. And if I say no? Thomas calmly clicked open the brass locks on his briefcase and removed a third folder. This one thicker, embossed with the company's letterhead. A single phrase written across the front in bold black ink. Compliance audit. May 2022. Findings escalated to corporate counsel. Daniel looked like someone had just drained the blood from his face. He didn't even open it. Jesus Christ. Not quite, Thomas said quietly, but close enough on paper. Daniel nodded slowly, mouth open, no words forming. You knew, Thomas continued. You've always known. You signed the acknowledgement reports. You knew my name was on every compliance release. You knew Helena wasn't operating under her own umbrella, but you were happy to let her pretend. I didn't think, Daniel started, But Thomas cut in. That's the problem. No one did. But I did. I think quite a bit, actually. Daniel glanced again at the folders. What do you want me to say at the mediation? The truth. That she knew about the oversight clause. That she used company funds inappropriately. That you flagged it, and it escalated. You'll be reading a pre-written statement. Nothing theatrical. Just clean and legal. Daniel hesitated. And after? Thomas stood and adjusted his blazer. After? You go back to work. You don't lose your job. Because the only reason you're still here, Daniel, is because I haven't sent that folder. He tapped the corporate counsel one. Up the chain. A beat of silence. I'll be there, Daniel whispered. Thomas nodded once, picked up the folders, slid them back into his briefcase, and walked out without a backward glance. Outside, the sun was setting behind the skyline. Downtown buzzed with Friday energy. Helena would be at the spa now, her usual reset ritual before a weekend of pretending to care about her husband's mood. Thomas didn't head home. He went to a storage facility in the industrial district, a unit he paid for in cash, under a trust name Helena never knew existed. Inside, neat rows of boxes, all labeled. Years of documentation. Contracts. Emails. Photos. He pulled one box from the shelf. HJ, Private, 04. Inside, a printed photo from a company retreat. Helena and Daniel on a boat. Champagne. No client in sight. Underneath, a folder labeled, Retreat Expense Reimbursement, flagged but approved. Signed by D. Hoffman. Countersigned by T. Whitmore. The evidence had been there for a long time. He just hadn't needed to use it. Until now. She handed him the envelope on the porch like it was an Amazon return. No eye contact, just a forced smile. Let's not make this ugly, Helena said, as if that were still in her hands. We've both changed. You've been distant. This is just the honest next step. Thomas took the envelope without a word. Divorce paperwork, templated and tidy. She'd even tabbed where he needed to sign with little neon flags. We can settle privately, she added, as if it were a gift. No lawyers breathing down our necks. No family court nonsense. Just mediation. Clean. Efficient. Like you like it. He nodded once and stepped back inside. The door clicked softly behind him. She didn't notice the briefcase resting just inside the hall. She never looked down anymore. The mediation was set for Friday. Helena's team reserved one of those upscale neutral sites in Midtown. Glass walls, white oak floors, coffee station that looked like a Tesla showroom. She arrived 10 minutes early with a red folder and a new attitude. Equal parts polished executive and suffering wife. Hair coiled, heels military sharp, and a navy blue dress that screamed, I'm still valuable. Her lawyer was younger than expected. 30-something. Haircut too fresh. Confidence too eager. Helena had likely picked him for style over substance. Someone who wouldn't ask too many questions about the gray zones. Thomas arrived exactly on time. Gray blazer, black slacks, worn leather portfolio. Not a power move. Just deliberate. He looked like someone who had no interest in flair, but full control of the agenda. The mediator, Marcia, introduced herself in soothing tones. She explained how today was about mutual understanding, equitable division, respectful closure. Helena nodded like she was already 2 chapters ahead. We're seeking primary residence. Her lawyer began before coffee had even cooled. Mr. Whitmore is often working off-site and expressed no long-term parenting plan. He smiled like a game show host who thought he just hit a buzzer. Thomas said nothing. He simply opened his portfolio and placed 2 slim documents on the table, face down. Helena arched an eyebrow. Are those financials? Thomas didn't answer. Marcia stepped in. Let's keep things sequential. We'll review asset disclosures next. As Helena's lawyer dove into valuations, Thomas let his eyes scan the room. Helena leaned back, crossing her legs like it was a victory lap. She had no idea what was coming. Because like most people who live in curated worlds, she believed stories started when she entered the room. That's when the door opened again, and Daniel walked in. Helena's boss, wearing a charcoal suit, hands empty except for one sealed envelope and a neutral expression that bordered on fear. The room fell still. Her lawyer glanced up, then back at the schedule. I don't think we had any third-party appearances on docket. Thomas finally spoke. He's my witness. Helena turned sharply, the first crack in her facade showing. Witness to what? Daniel didn't even look at her. He moved to the empty seat beside Thomas, nodded once to Marcia, and handed her the envelope. Statement of witness, he said calmly. I'll read if needed. Helena's mouth parted slightly. Her lawyer leaned over, whispering now, confusion giving way to concern. Ma'am, do you know what this is? I have no idea, she said, but the lie came too fast. Daniel adjusted his cuffs. For a moment, he seemed smaller than usual. Then Thomas slid the second document across the table to the mediator. A printout of the original compliance clause from the HR documentation. Highlighted in yellow, audit signatory, T. Whitmore. Marcia looked up. Would you like to read your statement aloud, Mr. Hoffman? Only if she disputes it, Daniel said flatly, still not looking at Helena. Her lawyer flipped through the statement pages, faster and faster, until something stuck. A line that changed the way he held the folder. The smirk fell away. The pen in his hand dropped, softly, onto the table. Then he whispered it. Oh my God. He turned to Helena, leaned close. Ma'am, do you know who he is to this company? She stared blankly. My husband. No, her lawyer murmured. He's on the compliance board. He's been approving your division's audits since before the merger. He's listed as a silent stakeholder, and he has full visibility over HR logs. Helena blinked. Once. Twice. Then her lips parted. That's not possible. Her lawyer leaned back like he'd just touched a hot stove. It is. His name's on all of it. I don't even know how he missed it. Thomas looked at Helena for the first time that morning, and spoke only once. You asked me to review the paperwork. So I did. She said nothing, just stared, like her brain was frozen mid-buffer. The mediator cleared her throat. Shall we proceed with disclosures? And in that moment, just as quickly as she had strutted in, Helena lost control of the narrative. Because now, her own boss was a hostile witness, and the man she thought she was divorcing quietly had the floor. The problem with control is that most people think it comes from volume, from being the loudest voice in the room, the one standing at the front of the PowerPoint slide. Helena had always believed that. She weaponized confidence like perfume. Spray it on, walk in, expect deference. But now, as she sat there in designer heels and practiced indignation, watching her lawyer turn ashen while flipping through pages he should have seen weeks ago, she finally understood the truth. Control comes in silence. From the man in the room who never raised his voice, because he never had to. Her lawyer adjusted his tie. His voice dropped low, almost reverent. Ma'am, I'm telling you, your husband isn't who you think he is, in this room. He's not just your husband. He's the damn firewall. Helena looked between the two men, her eyes narrowing. What does that even mean? Daniel still hadn't made eye contact with her. He sat frozen, hands clenched on the table like a man waiting for the sentence to be read. The mediator, to her credit, remained composed, though Thomas noticed her posture had shifted subtly, like a referee who suddenly realizes she's been officiating the wrong game. The stack of financial disclosures Helena had brought now looked childish. A few printouts of checking accounts, a mortgage summary, a market app screenshot. She had come prepared to split assets. What she hadn't anticipated was that some of those assets were already disqualified from negotiation. Thomas reached into his portfolio and placed a third document on the table. It was thinner than the rest, just 2 pages. He didn't look at Helena. He didn't need to. Supplemental addendum to asset review, he said simply. Attached are trust-held corporate accounts, not marital assets. Audit clauses activated per Section 14 of the merger agreement. Her lawyer picked it up, scanned it, then exhaled sharply. You activated the clause. Thomas nodded once. Last Friday. Helena's voice cracked. This is a divorce. You don't get to pull corporate strings like this. Actually, the mediator interrupted. If Mr. Whitmore's oversight position includes conditional audit control tied to executive behavior, and if your name appears in any flagged reports, then yes, he does. Her lawyer leaned toward her again, eyes wide now. That toast your son made is in the audit. She laughed, hollow and confused. What? What audit? He was joking. He's 17. Daniel finally spoke. Quietly. You authorized the compliance clause 3 years ago, when you asked him to review the HR onboarding package. That clause allows any public statement by immediate family that compromises executive optics to be flagged. It's automatic. Her jaw moved, but no sound came. He signed off on that system, Daniel added. Your son's video was posted to TikTok. Got re-uploaded on LinkedIn. Flagged in 2 algorithms before Monday. Compliance notified me Tuesday. It's already logged. Helena's fingers gripped the edge of the table. That's not fair. That wasn't me speaking. But you didn't correct it either, Thomas said, finally turning to her. You let the punchline land, and your silence approved it. The room was still. The mediator glanced at the clock. Shall we proceed with the revised asset report? Her lawyer rubbed his eyes. We need a recess. Take 10 minutes, the mediator said. But I'll warn you, This is going to arbitration if you contest those documents. Helena stood abruptly, grabbing her purse with the kind of movement that begged for attention. You think you're clever, she hissed at Thomas. You think this makes you some kind of kingmaker? He didn't even look up from his notes. No, just the man who signs the logs. Out in the hallway, she paced like a caged animal. Her lawyer was on the phone, whispering furiously into the receiver, pacing in the opposite direction. Daniel remained seated, silent, miserable, a man who'd been given one final chance to tell the truth, and took it. Inside, Thomas stayed calm. He sipped the coffee someone had forgotten to collect. Cold, bitter, fitting. The mediator leaned in. For what it's worth, I've seen a lot of these. Most people explode. You're the first I've seen implode the room from the center without raising your voice. Thomas smiled faintly. That's because they mistake stillness for weakness. Outside, Helena's voice suddenly rose behind the frosted glass. He designed the audit software. Are you kidding me? The lawyer's response was inaudible, but the sound of her heels echoing back down the hall, getting fainter, was all Thomas needed. The room had already shifted, and she had no idea how far it would still fall. They came back from the break 10 minutes later, but Helena looked like she'd aged 10 years in that hallway. The flush in her cheeks was gone. Her posture had wilted, heels suddenly more burdened than boost. Her lawyer trailed behind her, face tight, lips pressed into the kind of line that said we're not in control anymore, and I don't know how to tell her without getting fired. Thomas hadn't moved. The mediator had refreshed her water, the air in the room cooler now, clinical, dissecting. Shall we resume? The mediator asked. Helena nodded without speaking. It was the first time in a long time she didn't fill silence with commentary or sarcasm. Thomas placed a small black drive on the table. These are the accounts she'll want clarification on. Her lawyer picked it up and plugged it into his laptop without asking. Within seconds, his face shifted. Not panic, more like confusion, then concern, then disbelief. These are corporate. Wait, what is TTWCM Group Tier Holdings? And why is she listed under behavioral clauses? Thomas handed over another sheet of paper, already prepared. Clause 14. Subsection B of the Behavioral Oversight Protocol. It's baked into the bylaws of the trust, tied to public reputation damage originating from household entities. She's a legal spouse. Her son's statements, uncontested and publicly available, activate the clause. Her lawyer's voice cracked. You're telling me, because her son made a joke, she can't access these? It wasn't the joke, Thomas replied. It was the absence of rebuttal. Silence implies consent. That's how PR clauses work in compliance. She let it stand, in front of a senior executive. On record, Helena finally spoke. That can't be legal. The mediator raised her hand. It's legal, and it's airtight. I've seen clauses like this in higher stakes portfolios, usually political families or legacy executives. What's unique here is the audit trail. The video, the timestamp, the digital footprint, all confirmed. You triggered it, Helena, even indirectly. Her lawyer scrolled frantically. These properties, 3 of them were in the initial marital disclosure. How are they now considered restricted? Thomas calmly flipped open the master ledger. Because they weren't owned. They were allocated. There's a difference. The Whitmore Trust assigns privileges, not titles. And privileges are conditional. Helena's voice was a whisper. You always said we'd share everything. I lied, Thomas said flatly. Because you did. Her breath caught. And these accounts? Her lawyer asked, voice getting tighter. Tier 3 and 4 holdings. They fall under discretionary inheritance law, not divorce law. They were structured by my grandfather, not me. I just followed the rules. He smiled faintly. Which you helped me enforce when you signed that onboarding packet 3 years ago. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for her water. And what is available for negotiation? The mediator asked, her voice perfectly neutral. Thomas slid a second sheet across the table. The lake house, her business account, 1 joint portfolio, and my personal checking. That's it. That's not a fair split, Helena said, rising now, fire returning to her voice. That's not half. It's not a punishment, Thomas replied calmly. It's a reaction, and you're not being stripped of anything. You're just being returned to what you built. The mediator nodded toward the paperwork. We'll proceed under these terms. The triggered clauses prevent a clean 50/50ths. Her lawyer whispered again. I suggest we settle. No, Helena snapped. Not yet. She turned to Thomas. This is your revenge? Legal booby traps and quiet setups. This, he said, finally looking her dead in the eye, is me doing exactly what you always told me to. Know my worth. I just never mentioned it was measured in signatures you never read. She went pale. Again. And for the first time in the entire process, amid all the legalese and maneuvering, Helena looked like she finally understood something. This wasn't just about divorce. It wasn't about division of property or custody or assets. It was about humiliation. Not public, not dramatic, but slow, calculated, undeniable. The kind that doesn't come from screaming. The kind that comes from a spreadsheet. And a man who spent a lifetime being overlooked. Until it was time to sign the exit. The call came in just past 11:30, long after Helena's attorney had finally given up trying to negotiate salvage terms. The mediation ended not with a bang but with paperwork, cold, official, and final. She'd left without a handshake, heels clicking like gunshots in an empty room, her makeup smudged at the corners from sweat she would later pretend was just the lighting. Thomas didn't watch her leave. He walked out 10 minutes later, briefcase in hand, lighter than when he arrived. By the time he was home, the porch light had switched off automatically, another forgotten setting Helena used to control with an app she'd bragged about setting up herself. He knew she never finished the automation sequence. She never finished much, truth be told. His phone buzzed just as he poured a bourbon. Neat. No ice. It was his son. The number wasn't saved, but the area code and timing were unmistakable. He let it ring twice before answering. Hello. The voice on the other end was smaller than he remembered, still trying to sound older, but now without the snark, without the glass-raising bravado. Dad. Thomas said nothing. I didn't know, the boy said. I swear, I didn't mean it like that. It was just a dumb joke. I didn't think it. Thomas cut in. Not coldly, but cleanly. Surgical. I know. There was a long silence. Then Thomas added, voice steady, low, final. It wasn't your words that cost her everything. It was her silence after. On the other end, he heard it, the breath hitch, the dawning realization. His son had thought the punchline was harmless, a laugh line meant to flex his closeness with his mom. But now he realized it had been the tripwire. And no one, not Helena, not the lawyer, not the audience of chuckling coworkers, had tried to stop him. Click. Thomas ended the call. No anger, just closure. He stared into the bourbon, amber catching the reflection of the old lamp in the corner. That lamp had belonged to his father. Ugly thing. Brass with green glass panels, the kind you'd find in a 1970s bank. Helena had always hated it, called it dad furniture. But Thomas kept it anyway, because some things outlive opinion. A knock came at the door, right on time. He opened it without hesitation. A courier stood there, briefcase in hand, the kind lawyers use for arbitration drops. Mr. Whitmore? Thomas nodded. Final copies, sir. Courier-only delivery, as requested. He accepted the case, signed the tablet, and shut the door quietly. Inside the case were 4 sealed envelopes. Helena's formal divorce settlement, locked at 22%, with no recourse for appeal due to the signed clause activation. The new board memo from Whitmore Strategy Group, adding Thomas as head of internal compliance. A transfer of custodial accounts to a third-party trustee, no longer under Helena's name. A 1-page letter from Daniel Hoffman, corporate letterhead, signed and dated, confirming Thomas's oversight role and affirming all statements provided in mediation. Thomas placed each envelope on the kitchen table like pieces of a completed puzzle. Then he reached into the drawer, the one Helena always assumed was full of junk mail and spare batteries. He pulled out a small leather box. Inside was a photo, old, worn at the edges. A younger Thomas, a much younger Helena, their son, maybe 4 years old, holding up a crayoned "Happy Birthday Daddy" card, smile crooked, one sock half off. Thomas stared at the photo for a long time. Then he placed it face down on the table and left it there. In the morning, it would be the only thing he didn't take with him, because some weight belongs to the past, and some echoes are better left in the silence they created. It arrived on a Thursday morning. No knock, just a ring of the doorbell. A courier in a charcoal uniform standing expressionless at the edge of Helena's perfectly landscaped porch. The package was slim, sealed in thick gray paper. No return address, just her name, embossed, not printed. That was the first thing that unsettled her. She signed without thinking, too distracted by a group chat on her phone buzzing with office gossip she was no longer part of. The courier didn't say a word. He turned and left, disappearing before she even looked up. She stood in the hallway of the house Thomas once designed. Each hallway, each window angle, each storage closet made with purpose. She used to joke that living in his spaces felt like living inside a spreadsheet. But now, In the stillness, it felt more like being trapped inside someone else's proof. Helena peeled the seal open carefully, almost reverently, and pulled out 3 items. The first was expected, the finalized divorce agreement. Page after page of legal exactitude. Her attorney's last-minute pleas for rewording ignored. A sharp 22% asset allocation. No alimony. No appeals. No reassessment clause. Ironclad. It even cited the clause she signed during her firm's merger, the one she'd labeled boilerplate at the time. She flipped to the last page and found a post-it note. Not from Thomas. From the mediator. Clause 14 executed without dispute. Case closed. The second item was worse. A letter. Company letterhead. Dated 3 days prior. From Daniel. Effective immediately, you are relieved of duty pending further review and internal compliance evaluation. Please do not return to the premises without escort. A severance review is underway, pending outcome of the final audit. All corporate devices must be surrendered by Friday, 5 p.m. There was no salutation. No, thank you for your service. Just a signature block, his initials, typed coldly beneath the department name that had never existed before Thomas made it so. Compliance Division, Whitmore Strategy Group. She stared at it for a long time. Not because she didn't understand it. Because she did. Daniel wasn't even in control anymore. He was just following orders. The third item, tucked beneath the others, wasn't even an official document. It was a glossy 5x7 photo. A group shot. Thomas stood in the center. Same blazer from the mediation. A calm smile. Not smug, not gloating, just done. On either side stood 2 unfamiliar men in suits. Both younger, both grinning. Behind them, etched in brushed steel, a plaque. Whitmore Strategy Group. Compliance Division, EST 2023. Beneath it, a Latin phrase she didn't recognize. She looked it up later. Cateset, cons entire videtur. He who is silent is taken to agree. No signature. No note. Not even a date. Because none of it needed explaining. She sat down on the bench by the foyer window, the one she used to complain Thomas placed too close to the door. Feels like a bus stop, she'd said once, dismissively. Now it felt prophetic. She glanced down at her phone. 17 unread messages. Her son, her mother, a few confused co-workers. None from Thomas. None would come. Outside, a white car idled at the curb. A new courier stepped out. This one had a box, labeled Corporate Retrieval. She didn't answer the door. Not because she didn't hear it, but because she already knew what was in the box and what wasn't. There was no corner office anymore. No accounts to manage. No image left to polish. There was only the sound of wheels on pavement as the courier rolled the box away, and the echo of a single, quiet truth, etched deeper than any insult ever spoken. It's not the punchline that ruins you. It's who was listening when you laughed.